Well, good morning and welcome back to Musings of a Texas Preacher Man. I'm Scott Fisher, and I'm glad you've chosen to study with me this morning. Well, yesterday we were in John chapter 6 and Jesus' discussion regarding resurrection, life from the dead. And if you missed yesterday's study, I encourage you, go back and watch it before you watch today's. 4 times within just a few verses of John chapter 6, verse 39, Jesus said that all that the Father had given him, quote, I lose nothing but raise it up on the last day. Now in this passage, Jesus ties together the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world, in contrast with the manna that their fathers had eaten in the wilderness, the resurrection, being raised up out of death and into life, not speaking of biological death, and the forgiveness of sins, the promise of the Messianic kingdom and the new covenant. Now, in John 6:45, Jesus quotes directly from Isaiah 54, which is a Messianic prophecy, and from Jeremiah chapter 31, the promise of a coming new covenant. Now, this morning, I want us to look at the prophecy of the coming new covenant in Jeremiah 31. We're going to begin at verse 31. Behold, days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. Not like the covenant which I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant which they broke, although I was a husband to them, declares the Lord. But this is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them, and on their heart I will write it, and I will be their God, and they will be my people. They will not teach again, each man his neighbor and each man his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and their sin I will remember no more. Now, it's from verse 34, which we just read, that Jesus quotes in his teaching in John chapter 6. And by doing so, he is saying that this new covenant prophecy was being fulfilled in him. And included in that new covenant is life from the dead, resurrection. Now, the writer of Hebrews focuses on the distinction between the old covenant and the new covenant, and states emphatically that, quote, when he said a new covenant, he has made the first obsolete. That's Hebrews 8, verse 13. There's so much debate today over whether or not the new covenant replaced the old covenant. For those who kick against this concept, whatever word you want to use to describe it, the fact is that the reason there is a new covenant is because the first covenant became obsolete. We know that Jesus instituted or inaugurated the new covenant with the Last Supper on the night before his crucifixion, when he shared the bread and the wine with his disciples and declared that the cup and the wine within it is, quote, this is my blood of the covenant which is poured out for the many. This covenant was ratified with the crucifixion and the resurrection. This new covenant was a better covenant, according to Hebrews, built on better promises, based on a better sacrifice, ratified with better blood. It was under a better ministry and a better priesthood. But at the time Hebrews is written, 35 years after the crucifixion, the first covenant is still in place. Yes, it's growing old and it is ready to disappear. The old covenant reached its fulfillment in Jesus. As Paul said in Romans 8, verse 3, that what the law could not do, weak as it was through the flesh, God did, sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh, and as an offering for sin, he condemned sin in the flesh. In contrast with those Israelites who were a part of the Exodus from Egypt and the covenant established at Mount Sinai, those first followers of Jesus were coming to a different mountain, Mount Zion. The writer of Hebrews explains the significance of what these followers of Jesus were experiencing. And again, this is 35 years after the crucifixion and resurrection. Hebrews 12, beginning at verse 22. But you have come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to the myriads of angels, and to the general assembly and church of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood, which speaks better than the blood of Abel. Now, I want to emphasize this point. The new covenant, the kingdom, the heavenly Jerusalem, the general assembly, the church of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, these are all synonyms. They are representative of the same thing. It is the kingdom. It's the new covenant. It's what Jesus brought. Now, verse 25, he says to these first century believers, written again at about 65 AD, see to it that you do not refuse him who is speaking. For if those who did not escape when they refused him who warned them on earth, much less will we escape who turn away from him who warns from heaven. And his voice shook the earth then, but now he has promised, saying, yet once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heaven. And this expression, yet once more, denotes the removing of those things which can be shaken, as of created things, so that those things which cannot be shaken may remain. Now again, what's significant about this statement is that it speaks in the present tense of, quote, the removing of those things which can be shaken. Here's the point. 35 years after the crucifixion, though the new covenant has been inaugurated and all who had believed in Jesus as the promised Messiah had experienced the new birth and the new covenant, it wasn't until 40 years later, in 70 AD, when the first covenant had been made fully obsolete and taken out of the way. Only the eternal new covenant kingdom would remain. And so the writer states, therefore, since we receive a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let us show gratitude by which we may offer to God an acceptable service with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. That first covenant had glory, but its glory was fading, and in contrast with the glory of the new covenant, it was as if the first covenant was without glory. The removal of the temple, the removal of the Judaistic system was necessary in fulfillment of Jesus' prophecy, the Olivet Discourse. The transition period was a period of 40 years. The second Exodus, the Exodus from the bondage and slavery of the old covenant system. Just like the Exodus from Egypt took 40 years until crossing over the Jordan River into the Promised Land. This Exodus was going to take 40 years from the time of the crucifixion until the removal of the temple and the holy city. Another Exodus transition period of 40 years. Now, you and I are not awaiting the new covenant. We're not awaiting the kingdom. We're not under the old covenant, and that covenant has vanished, completely faded away, become obsolete, and has been superseded by the new covenant in his blood. We have a kingdom which cannot be shaken. We have an eternal kingdom. We have his very presence. Well, we're going to begin to look at what it means to live in the kingdom, to be raised up with Christ and seated with Him in heavenly places, to be a part of the heavenly Jerusalem. Well, I want to thank you for studying with me this morning. And again, if what I'm sharing with you goes against what you've always believed, don't be afraid or intimidated. Let the Scriptures be your source. Study the Word. Let Scripture interpret Scripture. We'll be picking up right here again tomorrow. Excuse me. As we continue our study of the truth of the Messianic kingdom. I want to thank you for joining me for Musings of a Texas Preacher Man. And I hope you'll continue to join me Tuesday mornings through Friday mornings each week right here. Why not click on the subscribe button on the lower right corner of your screen and you'll be notified in YouTube whenever a new video gets posted. And if you're watching on Facebook, consider sharing this on your wall and invite your friends to watch it. And if you saw it on Twitter, retweet it and encourage your friends to watch. And if you live in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, why not join me on Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. for Tuesday Nights in the Word? Hey, come out and join us. I hope you'll go out and make today a great day.